Peace and blessings. Namaste to all light warriors, workers, and everything in between. It is I, Sophie, today, and continuing on with the Warrior Goddess training, I wanted to revisit some of the Sophia archetypes, okay, that we have found in a lot of religious texts, and I want to deal with fractals, okay, and I also want to deal with teaching you or helping you identify one of, or there might be more than one, of these archetypes that identify with the divine feminine. See, it's very important to realize that not all divine feminines are cookie cutters. Okay, we have different walks of life. We have different calls. Some of us come in to be very, very compassionate and loving and healing, which is the highest law. Okay, however, some of us have more assertive natures, more warrior natures. There are some of us that are more homebody, and there's others of us who are always on the go. Okay, but throughout our journeys, we start to identify in this day and age with Sophia Christ consciousness. Okay, this is the divine feminine's reintroduction to society. She has always been around, but some of her power, her influence, her teachings have been removed. Okay, and as divine feminines, we are to start identifying with our divine feminines and their various walks of life and their struggles as well. Okay, so first of all, when we deal with Sophia and Sophia Christ consciousness, when we're dealing with any type of consciousness, we have what is considered fractals. And I know that many of you have been taught an understanding of what fractals are, but I'm here to bring to you a different perspective coming from the realms of the Ein Sof. Okay? If you've ever been a student of the Zohar, you will understand terms such as big face, little face, light, and reflected light. Okay? When we're dealing with any type of consciousness, there's always an original. Okay? However, that original is the foundation of that particular consciousness. That consciousness gets uploaded into the collective consciousness, and others have the ability to identify or download and connect to that particular energy. Okay, so we are talking about Christ being an energy. We have Yeshua as an energy. We have Shiva as an energy. We have Sophia as an energy. Jehovah, a moon, Osiris, all of that. Okay, these are stored energetic fields. Okay, that has a certain set of consciousness or certain level of consciousness that others have the ability to identify with, tap in, okay, and receive information from. And some can even go through the experiences of some of this consciousness, okay, that is being nested within the collective. All right. So when we want to deal with fractals, what we are actually dealing with is the original and reflected light of that original. Okay. So I want you to visualize entering into a fun house and fun house mirrors. Okay, as you stand in the center of this room, you are the object of matter, okay? But when you look around, you see different variations of yourself. And some of them are in distortion, okay? Some of them make you look good. Some of them make you look hilarious, all right? This is the mind of dealing in fractals. All right, so it's not unheard of to say, okay, I am identifying with Sophia and 12 more Sophias out there. All right, it's not unheard of to say, okay, I am identifying with Mary Magdalene, but there's 40 or 500 out there. Okay, but there's always an original source for that. And then we have the ability to tap into that source. All right, now, what I want to discuss is, how are you going to identify what your prototypes are? So I'm going to go through very briefly, and then later on in the series, I'll start identifying each of these characteristics of divine feminine, okay? Like I said, always been around, okay? High Master Yeshua always taught that the woman was divine, but he also said this is a hard teaching, all right? Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit later. All right, so heading from the beginning, you had archetypes like Queen Vashti. All right, Queen Vashti was in the Old Testament. She had a queendom. She was married to a very prominent king. And one day he threw a huge party and invited all of the men in the land to come to that party. Simultaneously, Queen Vashti did the same thing and brought all of the women into her courts, okay? And they were holding these parties simultaneously, but in two different areas of the castle, okay? Now, the husband, the king, he gets drunk, his men gets drunk, and he was so smitten by his wife's beauty that after he started drinking, he called for her to come and parade her around all of these drunk men so they can Google over her and he can be proud of her. Now, from his mind and his standpoint, it could have been very innocent. You know, it could have been just him admiring her and wanting the world to see, but from her standpoint, see, she had a specific position. All right. And her divine feminine, her power, her wisdom was not to be belittled in that matter. This is how she is thinking. Okay. So it was offensive to her to come out and be paraded in front of all of these drunken, googly men. So she refused to come out. Okay. She had business to take care of. Nobody wants to entertain a bunch of alcoholics. When she did that, all of the other men came up to the king and was like, what are you going to do about that queen? Because if our wives get wind that she wasn't obedient to you, then they'll start being disobedient to us too. So what did the king have to do? He took her crown. What you don't understand is she was okay with it. Better to lose the crown than dignity. That's one archetype. All right. Now, you have another one, Miriam, okay? Miriam and the Levitical priesthood. So when they were all being anointed and being ordained as priests in Israel, Miriam was the only sister there, okay? And she went through the same ritual, but they called her a prophetess. And what she did was charge and lead the women into praise, okay, and healing. Meanwhile, the men did the priestly duties. But the moment that she spoke out against something, her crown was taken too, and she was admonished. All right? You also have Hulda. Hulda was in the Old Testament. Hulda was very astute as a woman, a divine feminine at that time. She had a school and a grand library, and all the kings and priests had to go to her to decode and decipher ancient texts so that they can understand what they needed to do, okay? It didn't mean that they appreciated it. Actually, her name was then translated into Weasel. Are you following me? All right? You also have Deborah, divine feminine judge and one of the wisest in Israel, also not that much appreciated. All right. You also had Mary Magdalene. Okay. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. Mary Magdalene came from Hebrew royalty. And she was actually very, very knowledgeable in esoteric wisdom. And she understood the mystery schools. Okay. And she came from prosperity. So when she pairs up with Yeshua and he's teaching and he has his disciples, she, of course, is in awe of what he is teaching. But when he hears her speak, he realizes right then and there that she is divine. And not only divine, but wiser than all of his male disciples. And she no longer becomes a disciple. She partners with him and they go off into ministry together. Okay, but that part of the history written out as well. Okay, do you see where I'm going with this? In ancient Babylon, it was one of my favorite goddesses. Her name was Inanna. Inanna was considered the goddess of love and war. And she also was considered the queen of heaven during that time. And the women of Israel started identifying with her because all they had to do was bake cakes, and they would bake these cakes, and their lands become very, very prosperous. So the women transitioned and started to go under Inanna. It's important to know that Inanna has other names as well, okay? Because a lot of these Elohims or archetypes had this going on. Depending on the culture and the language that they were in, their names would translate over time. So Inanna was also known as Ishtar, was also known as Hathor in Egypt, okay? But very powerful divine feminine, can open up portals, okay, and would bring in ascended masters through these portals, okay, from the Sirius system that would also help her not only learn, but would teach her students as well, okay? Inanna had all of her male brothers around her, and she was very, very beloved by Anu, okay? Anu favored her over his male sons because there was something very special and powerful. He knew who she really was, okay? Her brothers did not, all right? I'm going to keep going, just keep following me. So she was constantly being dethroned, okay? Sophia, in the Epistle, Sophia says, instead of loving me, they slandered me. And your Bibles also talk about the lying scribes and lying tongues, okay? We are identifying with these stories because we are identifying with the rise and fall of the divine feminine as a whole. And even though these are archetypes of them, you will find that you will have the ability to relate to one or all of them. And you will also see this playing out as a collective. Remember, I always talk about a microcosm and a macrocosm, okay? So now, Inanna and her brothers, they divvied the land up, okay, during this time. And these particular elves were charged over different parts of the land to teach and raise the consciousness of humanity, okay, to the Most High. But we knew how that went, right? Did that happen? No. A lot of us raised the consciousness to ourselves. And so here we are, fixing it and getting it right. But what was important about her story was her brothers at that time had all started intermingling and marrying with human wives. Kind of left her desolate, okay? Because as a divine feminine, there's a certain status that women had to have as opposed to men. See, our men could run amok, okay? But when we're divine feminine, we hold a certain position, all right? So we're not supposed to act the way that they do. Well, Inanna says, what's good for you is good for me. So she wanted to find herself a lover as well. What was happening with her is as she was starting to try to find a lover for her, when she would enter into the bedroom chambers with these men, these human men, when she would start to make love to them, she would drain their life force from them and they would die. This was not done on purpose. This was done because there was an incompatibility during that time with the Elohim and humanity. So they would start to die. But she runs into a demigod, okay? One that has the blood of the Elohim, but is still functioning as a human. His name is Tammuz. You read about him in your Bible under Tammuz, okay? So Inanna loved him. She takes him into her bedroom chambers. She's very assertive in bed, okay? Goddess of love and goddess of war. And what it really is about is her passion and her power. So she takes him into her bedroom chambers. And in the morning, he's still alive. He was able to handle her energy. So now she has a husband, right? Now, she falls in love with him. It does not sit right with her brothers because she wasn't supposed to be intermingling, so to speak. So Marduk decides that he's jealous and he goes and he kills Tammuz by accident, how the story goes. This did not sit well with Inanna. And what you have to understand, divine feminines, is that you are way stronger than what you've been led on to believe. See, Inanna was a fierce continence, okay? So fierce, almost like Kali in India, which is another divine feminine, but we'll get into that later. So fierce that the men, her brothers, feared her. You remember this teaching of hell has no fury like a woman scorned. So when she finds out that her lover has died and transitioned and went down to the underworld, she went after Marduk in her ship and in his ship. And she chased him all around into the pyramids of Egypt. And he went into the king's chamber and hid himself from her. Her continence and her warrior nature was a lot stronger than theirs. Also, her ability to love was a lot stronger than theirs. So he hides himself into the king's chamber of Egypt, and she's outside waiting and pacing and calling for him. You killed my husband. There's consequences and repercussions behind that one, dear. Her father and her other brothers calms her down, and she forgives him. And they go and get him out of the king's chamber. But her story was written as if she was evil. She's not the only one. There's a story of Lilith, okay, from the beginning that has been twisted and perverted around. But you can find the true story in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, okay? Lilith was not a rebellious woman. Lilith came from a realm that was higher. And when she entered into this realm, she was paired with a divine masculine that did not appreciate her wisdom and what she had to bring to offer. He wasn't terrible to her, but very dismissive and sought to subdue her, okay? Because remember, this is a time and a season where this is how things played out. Remember, our ancient ancestors and Elohim were not native to this earth. So when they're entering in, they're bringing with them the customs, the laws, the culture of their planets. All right? So he seeks to subdue her and control her. Her biggest sin, or transgression, as they say, she leaves him and she marries a disagreeable. Okay? All right? So she had to make her way back out of that as well. Now, when we're going through these divine feminine archetypes, where do you see yourself? Because as the Pistis Sophia explains, Sophia, the wisdom nature of God, okay, or the Ein Sof, has to self-realize in all 13 eons. Divine feminine, if you are a multidimensional being having a human experience, this is your charge too. How did I have the ability to go back in time and see and experience some of these emanations? I asked. When I entered into this journey and this walk, the first thing that I did when I went before the highest of the divine was to say, I need to see me. I want to go back as far as I can. And I don't want to just see the good side. I want to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, because this is part of me clearing karma and shadow work. So I needed to see myself in the darkest and also in the highest light. And you'll see the various levels of consciousness that all women went through when we start to do this. But the goddess that I identified with the most was Inanna. Remember, I tell you, look at your life. Does it tell a story? Okay? So I'm going to share with you how I begin to identify that in a earlier emanation that I was part of that class of Ibri that came through, and that a previous emanation of mine was her. So in this day and age, when I was growing up, I was always surrounded by my brothers and my boy cousins. I thought at first that it was a possibility that I was simply a tomboy, but I wasn't. I was very feminine. I always kept my hair done, always wore jewelry, always had heels. I was very feminine. But my mind always identified with the nature of the masculine. Okay? I was around it my entire life, and in this incarnation, it's the same thing. All right? Now, my mother, she took me to Six Flags Great Adventures of New Jersey when I was 14 years old and put me on my first roller coaster. It was called the Lightning Loop. And all it was is it shot this way, 2 loops, go to the other end, stop, and then does the same thing backwards. I get on this when I'm 14 years old with my mom. I asked her, is it going to be good? Oh, you're going to love it. You're going to have fun. So we get on it. We do the drop. We do the loops. We go to the other side, and then it stops. I stopped breathing. My mother hit me. Are you okay? Exhale. Yes. Is it over? Because I was ready to get off. My mother says, no, we have to go backwards, but don't worry about it. Going backwards is a lot easier than forward. Well, she told a bold-faced lie. It was equally terrifying. And when I got off of that ride, my mother was screaming and I was shaking. But something kicked in that day. DNA cellular remembrance. I couldn't get the feeling that adrenaline gave me out of my system. And from that moment on, I became an adrenaline junkie, addicted to roller coasters, addicted to drops, okay? Addicted to amusement parks. I want to go fast, like Ricky Bobby, okay? And it just got worse and worse and worse. And the people that I would be around, they would look at these coasters and then they would say, holy crap, I'm not getting on that. And I'm like, see you later. I'm on it. And not only am I on it, the pictures that are coming out when you go through the drop while everybody's screaming, I'm like this. Why? Because I was used to flying ships. Do you see? That's not all. I also, growing up, became very fascinated with weapons and martial arts as well. So my uncle in North Carolina was the judo state champion. And when I lived with him, I studied under him. And I learned how to throw. And I learned how to grapple. And then when that was done, I transitioned over to Taekwondo. I didn't like Taekwondo that much. It seemed a little, I don't know, fake. Maybe it was just my teacher. But then after that, I transitioned over to Muay Thai kickboxing. And I fell in love with that because that felt organic and authentic. And when you're growing up in the concrete jungle, you want to know how to defend yourself because it's a rite of passage, unfortunately. Okay, so I fell in love with Muay Thai. And I found myself going to the gym and competing in rings. Yeah. So that was a thing. Then after that, I also started falling in love with weapons and weapon training, katana, swords, guns, bow and arrow. This was part of my nature that I was keeping hidden. But as I'm starting to awake, I'm understanding this is part of one of my emanations. Learn to identify with the Sophia and the divine feminine. Find your archetypes. Good, bad, or indifferent. If it is negative, learn to identify with it. And if it is positive, just keep on elevating forward. I am Sophie, and I love you all.